Would you like to take a really ordinary supply, like a roll of crepe paper streamers from the party section of the dollar store, and turn it into an array of beautiful embellishments for paper crafting? That's what I'm doing today, so let's get started. Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Today's project was inspired by my design teamwork over at the Counterfeit Kit Challenge, where we take an existing scrapbooking kit in the world and we're inspired to curate our own collection of paper crafty goodies. And I was inspired by this crepe paper ribbon. Now we're going to make our own for just pennies, and along the way we'll make a few other things as well. So let's go ahead and start off with that ruffled ribbon, since that was my basis of inspiration. I went to my sewing machine, and don't worry if you don't have a sewing machine, I will show you how to do this without any sewing involved. So here I am at my sewing machine, and pardon the lighting, my sewing is not set up for filming, so I did my best with my lighting. But really, you're just taking a pinch of fabric and then folding it back towards your presser foot and then stitching over the whole row of ribbon. And when you need more, just unroll some of that crepe paper and keep going. And here's a bit of a tip for you. I keep separate needles for fabric and paper. When they've worn out on fabric, then I keep them for paper, and I keep them in separate containers. And when I'm done sewing for the day, I tuck this little tag underneath my presser foot so I know if I have a fabric or a paper needle installed. All right, with my yards and yards of ribbon complete, let me show you when you want to cut off a slice of this ribbon. I just use my scissors and then I'll put a tiny dab of glue where the thread is, just to hold that thread in place so it won't unravel on me. And speaking of glue, if you don't have a sewing machine, then glue is going to be your go-to item here. I'm going to do the same thing where I take a pinch of that crepe paper and fold it away from me, and then I will put a dab of glue underneath there. Now the trick to this one is sometimes that glue will soak all the way through and also glue the back side of that fold, but if it doesn't, you will need to lift it up and add a dab of glue there. Now you can see the dabs of glue when they're wet, but they will dry clear. And then if you want to add stitching detail, just use a pin, and that is totally optional. And here you can see what that looks like when it's finished. All right, the next two items are similar in construction, so I kind of lumped them together a little bit. You are also going to need some scratch pieces of paper to help construct these. We're going to start with the rosettes, which is where I was inspired first, and then I got the idea to do these flowers after making the rosettes. So that is the order we will tackle these in. You will need a circle punch, but if you don't have a circle punch, you can just cut out a circle by hand. I know they're not as tidy, but it will certainly work. Now, I'm going to have two of these punches for each of these projects, and I'm going to start off with the rosette by putting a circle down on the bottom and then just adding glue to the edge. I'm going to ruffle this fabric as I go, and I'll take about 2 or 3 pinches, and that's enough to tack into the glue as we continue to work. And then I'll just kind of rotate it around and continue pinching and tacking with glue as we go, trying to rotate that ribbon into a rosette. Now you can do this with more or less ruffles depending on how full of a rosette you want. The second one that I'm doing here on the table has more ruffles than the first sample one up at the top, so it is up to you how much ruffling you want to do. And then at the end, I'm just going to slice off that edge and give it a little bit of a glue down. You don't have to do that part, but I like the little finishing touch. And then I will cover up all that mess in the middle with the top part of my circle punch to complete my rosette. Now you notice that we are just working with white crepe paper right now, but you can work with any colors, and these would be fun in polka dots or zigzag patterns of crepe paper for birthdays and whatnot. You can also cut down these rosettes once they're finished, or you can cut your crepe paper in half before you even get started, and you can get different sizes of rosettes. You can stack and mix and match them and create lots and lots of embellishments. All right, with those done, let's go ahead and move on to the flowers. We're going to start off the process the same way. I'm just using a smaller circle punch here so that I can create the centers of my flowers. And this is why I chose yellow paper, so that I can make my centers yellow. We will talk about coloring crepe paper at the end of the video, but I wanted to focus on the techniques here. Now you saw me slice a piece of this crepe paper off, and one edge was already angled, but I'm going to go ahead and angle the other edge. The top is about 2 inches and the bottom is about 1 inch. Don't get hung up on the measurements. You just want to start off with that kind of trapezoid shape and then round the corners of the top edge with your scissors, and that will create more of a petal shape. Once you pinch it down, then you've got more of a fluffy petal shape. And here you can just tack them into place on the bottom piece of that circle punch so that you have a place to start your flower. Now, I'm going to speed up this process so that you don't have to do one petal at a time. Because crepe paper is so thin, you can stack them up and do all of the petals you need probably for one row of petals at a time. So here I've got them stacked up. I'm just cutting off angles on the side. I'm rounding my corners. And then as I push all that stuff out of the way, you can see that I have a selection of petals ready to pinch and glue down. My sample on the top of the screen has 6 petals. I cut out 5 petals for this next sample. And then you can also add separate rows of petals for very, very full flowers. So you can add 2 or 3 rows and get really full flowers. Or like I did with this sample up at the top, you can add a fringed ruffle to the center of your flower for a different flower style. And I did that by just trimming down a short piece of my crepe paper and slicing it in half. And this is what I mean when I was talking about those rosettes. You can slice it in half and do the rosettes with the half width. Now here I'm just using my scissors to nip the ribbon into a fringe pattern, and I am sure not to nip all the way down to, wait, what is that thumbs down? I'm sure, there it is again, hang on. Okay, this turns out to be a happy new feature on my Macintosh, and I will have to learn how to shut that off, but let's get back to the crafting. All right, like I said, you just nip the fringe close to the edge, and the closer you get to the edge, the more pliable it will be to go around the circle. But if you get too close, you're going to end up with confetti instead of a fringe. So here you can see I've got my fringe ready to go. I'm just going to add some glue, and I'm going to kind of do the same thing. I will try to twist it around, but I'm also going to give it a little bit of a ruffle as I go so that all that fringe overlaps. Now this fringe is a little on the long side, so you could trim it down some. It just depends on what you want. And in my sample above, my fringe is actually yellow, and I colored the white crepe paper yellow, and I will talk about that at the end of the video to give you some tips. But you could have multiple colors of crepe paper and do it that way as well. I like to use neutral colors and then use my coloring mediums to turn them the color that I want. That's my preferred method. All right, with my fringe in place, I will just add my flower center and give everything a little bit of a puff. And there you go, some pretty little flowers. Now you can make smaller size flowers by cutting your paper smaller. So here I've got 3 1-inch strips, and then I'm going to cut those in half and stack all of that up and do the same shaping method where I cut them at an angle on the edges and then I round off those top corners. And now I've got 6 little petals that I can add to my flower. You can mix and match the little petals with your bigger flowers instead of using the fringe, or you can stack them up on your little flowers. Here I'm going to add a second row of petals to this flower that I've already completed. I am adding it behind the row that I finished, so either way you can add it on top of or behind. You'll just want to finish off your flower with a flower center to hide all of the glue and crumpled up paper in the middle. And when you're done with that, you will have a small, beautiful flower that you can use for your embellishing. The final thing that I wanted to share today is punching shapes out of crepe paper. Now this isn't as straightforward as you might think because crepe paper is very thin and friable. It doesn't punch well. So you are going to have to adhere it to a more sturdy piece of cardstock. And I'm going to do that with some liquid glue and my brayer. You can use an old credit card or a room key card to scrape your glue, but you're going to want a nice thin even layer of glue. And I'm going to put plenty of glue out here. This glue bottle has a nice wide tip so I can get plenty out without having to squeeze and squeeze. And then I'm going to smooth that glue out into a nice thin even layer. Anywhere that the crepe paper isn't nicely adhered to this thicker cardstock, and these are just scraps of cardstock again, anywhere that it's not adhered well, it will tend to tear when you're trying to punch. When you glue this down, you want to pat it down very well, but also gently so that you don't lose the wrinkles and textures from your crepe paper. Just make sure you take your time and get all of the surface area. And now I'm doing this on both colored cardstock and white cardstock, and you can see on the colored cardstock how it tones that color down, but it doesn't completely mask it. So this is a pretty way to alter your cardstock to get a lovely texture and a different tone of color. And I'm especially a fan of that texture. Now, all of these pieces are completely dry. It doesn't take too long because you are spreading that glue pretty thin. And I'm going to make more flowers, but out of this, you can punch any shape that you want. Hearts, stars, you name it. Go ahead and punch it or die cut it, and you get some pretty different looking embellishments. I'm going to finish off my little flower embellishments by stacking up a couple of sizes and adding a sequin to the middle. And if you save your leftover pieces and punch them carefully, you can even create some pretty little borders. So that was a bit of a bonus. Let's go ahead and move on to coloring this crepe paper. Like I said, I like to just keep white supplies on hand because I do have coloring mediums that I can color things with. And that way I just have to store my different colors of mediums instead of storing different colors of, 10 different types of supplies. And here I am using sprays. The first one I completely saturated. This one I'm going to give more of a mottled spray, but you can do this with any of your coloring mediums. In fact, here I have an inky pad left over. This is left over from sprays, but you can do this with ink pads, markers, you name it. Add some water either to your paper first or to the wet inky mediums on a mat. And when you add water, that helps it flow and move better. And if you want a complete solid color, I would recommend adding the water to your product and to the mat itself. But I'm going for a more watercolory, artistic look with this piece. Now, this crepe paper is a specialty crepe paper that I bought on Amazon. I can link you up to that. It's much thicker, so it can handle this type of technique a little bit better, but you can do this with a thin crepe paper as well. Of course, it would go a little bit faster and you'd have to work a little more carefully because it is thinner. But those are lots of ideas for using really inexpensive crepe paper to create your own beautiful embellishments. I hope you learned something new here. And if you did, please do give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and maybe share this video with people you know. I will be back with more videos for you soon. So until then, have an artful day.